You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode 91. Today we're talking about P.E.T. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have, and when you are thriving, when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindfulness Mama mentor. I coach overstressed moms on how to cultivate self-awareness in their daily lives to take family and life to a new level of awakening. I've been practicing yoga and mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting course, and I'm the mom of two girls, ages 7 and 10. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so glad you are here today. I have a really cool episode with you. I am talking to Larissa Dann, parent effectiveness training teacher and mom, and she's going to tell you some really cool stories about how this respectful form of communication and parenting works with even mediating conflicts with toddlers and how it gives kids an inner sense of self-worth. And we even talk about why children don't misbehave. So I know that you are going to like this a lot. We are here in this world here at mindfulmamamentor.com, which is the new URL. We've been kind of playing around with stuff here. So I'm happy to announce that we have a new website URL, mindfulmamamentor.com. And of course, the podcast is at mindfulmamapodcast.com. But anyway, here at mindfulmamamentor.com, should you head over there, we have some things going on this time of year. If you're listening in real time, if you're in the future, hello, so cool. And what is going on in real time is that I'm going to be enrolling my Mindful Mama Transformation group coaching program soon, and there will be either one or several groups. And this is a 6-month program for a small group of women who are really interested in creating a sisterhood that's all about transformation, bit by bit, through the ups, through the downs, and creating strong habits, learning to transform your communication with your kids and your life. It's really very powerful. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out over under Work With Me. And there's a link to that group coaching. Wah, wah, wah. I have no new iTunes reviews. If you want to support the podcast, I would love it if you would leave an iTunes review. Take a few moments for that. And now on to this episode. So I'm so excited to have Larissa Dann, who is a parent whose passion is parent education, on the podcast today. She writes on these topics such as parenting in the all ages and stages. And we're really going to look at all ages and stages here. And I found her blog, When My Baby Sprouts a Beard, which I really like. And we'll link over to that blog in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast today, Larissa.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, Hunter. I do appreciate being here.
Yeah.
On the other side of the world.
I know. We are talking from Larissa's in Australia, and I'm just south of Philadelphia. So gosh, we are far away. But it's so cool. We get to hang out and talk. It's really lovely. So tell me a little bit about what you were writing about in that blog post that I found you with, that When My Baby Sprouts a Beard. Tell me what was going on. Tell the listener what was going on there.
Oh, that's a big question. I think it was a reflection on being a parent, well, being a mum particularly, and my son was leaving the country. He's leaving the country for a minimum of 2 years. And I just wanted to reflect on my love for him and my from bringing him into the world, and completely besotted with him from the time he emerged to now, really. And I just I suppose I found that writing that blog just helped me think back to how just what it was like to have him as a baby, and then the toddler years and middle years and teenage years, and to watch him grow and blossom and grow that independence. So and finally enough to be able to leave and follow his passion.
Was it hard to let him go?
Yes and no. I don't know if you can ever prepare yourself. As you know, with P.E.T, it sort of helps with the skills. So the parenting skills of P.E.T are very intentional. And
I just want to interject here. If you could explain to the listener, what is P.E.T?
Oh, thank you. Never take anything for granted. So P.E.T is parenting, a set of parenting skills, and really it's a parenting approach that I came across when my son was just 8 months old. So and when I did I did it as a course. So it's an 8-week course, and I did it as a mum. I knew nothing about being a parent except the way that I'd been parented, and I was also not a young parent, and so I wanted to do things right. And so I came across this approach, and it just turned me 180 degrees in terms of how I would approach parenting and how I saw children. So it's basically it's an approach based on respect, on seeing your child as a person, deserving of the same respect as your neighbour or your best friend. And that's how I see it anyway. And having that sense of separateness. So I've been reflecting a lot lately on something another blog I'd like to write, but it's really about having that sense of separateness. And so that comes from, there's a couple of models in the P.E.T approach, the foundation of P.E.T approach, I think, which really helps and so for me that's about who owns the problem. So whether it's me, whether I'm upset, whether it's my child, whether we're both, or whether there's no problem. And the model's really useful because from that it's a scaffold as to which skills I will use in each specific situation. So it helps me respond rather than react.
So you said that the parent effectiveness training was, you saw the way you look at it is seeing your child as a whole person, just like deserving of respect, just like a neighbor or a friend. And someone might say, well, I don't know about this model, but someone might listen to you say that and think, well, I see my child as a whole person, worthy of respect. Yet a lot of our kind of more conventional ways of parenting don't actually show that. And I wonder if you could talk to a little bit about that. Like how does this contrast with the conventional ways that you see this as the way that shows respect as the whole person? How do these other ways not show respect to the child as a whole person?
I think because P.E.T shares the power of a relationship. So the whole basis of P.E.T is building a strong relationship, because this is what you've got to last your whole life, and this is what you will have to influence your child in the big decisions they're going to make in life. And the way that P.E.T looks at it is that as opposed to conventional parenting methods, P.E.T I would see as a relationship-based parenting method, and it's very democratic. So it's very inclusive of both the parent and the child's needs. It's not permissive. It doesn't allow the child all the power, and it doesn't give the parent all the power. Conventional parenting comes from a different approach, and that's known as the behavioural approach. And what that looks at is changing a child's behaviour, and it does that, in my view, in conventional parenting. When we're unhappy with a child's behaviour, if it's a conventional parenting approach, what we'll do to try and change that behaviour is through using rewards or punishment. So we're trying to get our child to do what we think is best, and we're going to do that by an external means of control, I suppose, by saying, well, if you do that, you'll get a reward or you'll get a punishment. And in that way, the child will change their behaviour out of, either out of fear or out of need. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, I don't think, and it may not enhance the relationship. And so for me, what I'm aiming for with PET is an internal discipline, and that's through that relationship approach. It's through problem solving with your children, so that they're looking at how their behaviour might be affecting other people. Mm-hmm. And they're also looking at meeting their own needs and not doing something at the expense of their own needs. Whereas I think with conventional behavioural approaches to parenting, where we might use like the types of punishment I'm talking about are things like consequences. I'm going to take away your iPad, or time out, which is really isolating children from relationships. I could give you a whole spiel on time out and why I think it's not so good.
Can you give us the quick version? I'm curious. I'm sure everybody's curiosity is piqued about this. Why not?
Yeah, because timeouts, it's seen as the punishments that's not a punishment, but it is, in my view. So, I've got a whole blog that will detail it much better than I'll be able to give it to you now. But basically, timeout, I think, is relational isolation. And that's how Daniel Siegel sees it. I'm actually not sure if that's how you pronounce his name, like whole brain child and no drama discipline.
Daniel Siegel. Yeah, I think. Thank you. As far as I know.
Yep. So, and it's about isolation and ostracizing, really. So when we put children in timeout, we're sort of saying, well, you're not part of this family for this amount of time. And brain studies now show that the pain that children feel, it goes a lot in the same brain pathways as physically hitting them. And it's interesting, preparing for this interview, I've written down a whole heap of incidents with my children, and I came across this incident where my daughter we were just having fun time around the dinner table, and she's just four, and she says to me, "You don't exist. You don't exist." And what happened for me was gobsmacking, in that I turned bright red. My eyes went downcast. I felt like crying, and I just wanted to shrivel up and go away, because I didn't exist. And so this is me, an adult. I'm meta-analysing my emotions as they happen. And I thought, well, wow, if I'm feeling that and my daughter is just having fun, what must it be like for a child who's not an adult, for a child who doesn't have that experience, who probably doesn't even know what they've done, and they've been isolated. And so I think it's quite deep. And I doubt that they're going to be thinking, oh, I must improve my behaviour. I suspect they'll be thinking, A, I don't know what I've done. B, why are they so angry with me? C, I really hate my mum and dad, or dad. So I don't think it's a good idea. And I think there's enough evidence now to show that it can do more harm than good in terms of relationship and in terms of changing behaviour.
So you learned about parent effectiveness training. You learned about parenting, with a democratic, peaceful, respect-based parenting. Learned how to parent without reward and punishment when your son was 8 months old.
Yep.
Which is amazing. And so you were able to bring that into your life, and probably teaching it, you were able to bring it into your life even more, and of course learn it even better than ever. And one of the things that you wrote about in your blog about your son, it was that he has all reflected on being raised in this respectful way, and as a young adult. And I'm wondering, what did he say? How did he reflect on his experience being raised by you in this way?
And I think he came to one of my classes. Is that what you're? Yeah. So
Yeah.
he came to my class, and we often talk about it as well. I also have I have a daughter as well, a teenage daughter, and we talk about the pet way because they're in a position, I suppose, where they see non-pet families.
Mm-hmm.
So in his reflection, I think I was quite interested to see him talk about our relationship and how he felt that he could come to me and talk to me. So, and I'll just preface this in this interview in terms of he's saying I asked him to come in and talk to a group of parents that I was teaching at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in and he sort of relaxed into the chair, and they just asked him a myriad of questions. And I think he just reflected on, how it perhaps helped him through his life in terms of friendships and in terms of our relationship. And he and his sister are very, very close. He and I are close. And we have a warm and respectful relationship. And I think that's what he reflected on. But he's also picked up the skills. And he teaches, and he teaches an instrument. And so with his students, he uses, for example, active listening a lot. And he told the parents at my course about how as soon as he would active listen, it would change the behaviour of the student, and how they could settle down to learn their instrument for whatever was happening at that time. And I suppose he just respects them as well as people. Ones. And also, my daughter also comes in to other classes that I do. I don't know. We started doing this when she was a younger teenager. And I don't know. The parents just ask her questions. The participants ask her questions, and she just answers. And mostly it's about relationship. It's about knowing what the skills are. And we talk about the skills. We talk about, so the specific skills that we use in active listening, in P.E.T, they're just communication skills. But they're skills like listening, active listening, which is about recognising the feeling and the facts, recognising the whole experience and feeding that back. And now it's been given words like emotion coaching, or labelled as emotion coaching. P.E.T also looks at being assertive, but in a way that doesn't blame. So maintaining that relationship through using I messages. And I messages would be something like, when I see this behaviour, I feel, because this is the effect it has on me. So when I see the toys on the floor, I feel concerned that I may trip over and hurt myself. That would be a non-blameful I message. And we also look at problem solving, so involving both the child and yourself in the solution. And my children, I suppose, have grown up with this and with this language. And so we can use this language to repair relationships, for example. So I'm going off track, but I'm not a perfect parent. And I think that's one of the great things about PET. It helps you be a person and a human being yourself, and you throw off that mantle of being a perfect parent. And sometimes I'm so not the perfect parent. I'm so embarrassed and I might just lose it. But what I have at my disposal then is the ability to come back and say, wow, I just said this to you. I used what we call them perhaps a you message. I just blamed you. And instead, what I really wish I'd done was I'd wish I'd used this I message. And this is what I meant to say. And then I'll use lots of active listening. So I must have really hurt you when I said this. And then I apologise. So I suppose that's how we put PET into practice a bit.
And so that's cool that both of your children have come and they've talked about it, and they have grown up with these tools, so they are able to use it. I mean, that's a question, that we think about, like when we're thinking about how we parent, will we be able to sort of break the habit of the generations of the habit of the blaming and the shaming that is conventionally used, and be able to start something new with a new generation. It's interesting because it's hard work for us parents who are trying to shift maybe from the way we were raised to a way that is respectful. But then hopefully we make it that much easier for the next generation. Was this really different from the way you were raised as a child?
Yes. So yeah, I was raised in the conventional way, which was lots of rewards, lots of praise, but also punishment, smacking, etc. So yeah, that's why I say it was sort of like 180 degrees. And it was also children. I was sort of raised with children are lovely, but as long as they have their place and they need to do what they're told, and they need to be obedient and compliant. And I think PET takes a different tack, which is it helps children develop a really good a sense of self-worth with compassion. So they feel they have an inner sense of self-worth, and at the same time, it's not like it's at the expense of anyone else. It's a sense of self-worth and compassion for others at the same time. That's how I see an outcome of PET.
And that I think is different from the sort of conventional outcomes, because the conventional outcomes, I mean, if we look at like the work, I mean, for me, when I look at the work that I do with women, with moms, that there is an epidemic of people whose self-worth is low, who don't feel worthy of so many things. And there's an epidemic of, that an inner voice that is shaming and blaming and harsh inside so many women and so many parents. And then it's becomes hard when we have that inner sense of like unacceptance of ourselves, and maybe not good enough feeling in ourselves, that it becomes really hard to then accept and deal with our kids and whatever they're going through, right? And so this alternative way you're saying is like helping them with an inner sense of self-worth, which is amazing, is so beautiful. So was this really was it hard for you to start to shift? I mean, you started when your son was a baby, so you were like kind of practicing when he was really young, but was it hard? Did your parents' voice come out of your mouth sometimes? I mean, you said you're not perfect, but
I so aren't. I'm so not perfect. And it was hard. And it's interesting because my son was so young, so I could start that way. But and at the same token, there was not a lot to practice with
Oh, yeah.
because he was so young. But I think it gave me, more than anything, it gave me an intention, and it gave me a platform. And I think one of the really lovely things that the more I think about it, the more I realise how important it is this notion that children don't misbehave, that they behave to meet a need. And so any of their behaviour, it's been so helpful. So any misbehave, I don't even use that word. So any behaviour that they have, I try to step back from it, to not take it personally, because it's generally not about me, it's about them not getting their needs met, that there's something underneath that's causing the upset, and that, whatever is upsetting them, that's the presenting problem. Underneath it, there's something that's just not going well for them, and so often that's been the case. And if I'd not actively listened, I wouldn't have found what was happening.
So that idea, and that can be like a huge game changer. I mean, for the listener, if you're listening, this idea that children don't misbehave is kind of a radical idea. If we are, coming from that conventional sense, like we look and we say, many parents say to me, like, my child is manipulating me and all these different things. And you're saying, no, they're trying to meet a need.
Yeah. And if we think of it like that, then we stop blaming. And then if I stop blaming, if I stop thinking that that you're pushing my button, that you're deliberately doing this to get at me, then I'm going to respond really differently. So I'll stop being defensive. I'll open myself up to trying to understand them. And I think also it helps to have that sense of separateness. So I can be really, I had some examples, but it's just gone out of my head. But if I can see what's happening for them, if I can note for myself that, I'm really not happy with being told that he hates me, I can deal with that another time. When my son, for example, says, I really hate you, then I need to see that as an expression of his distress at that time. And I think the other thing about that, that children don't misbehave, it's about noticing that their needs aren't met. And then if whatever they're doing is interfering with us meeting our needs, that's when there's a disagreement or a conflict, and that's when we can use those skills to work out the best way to get through that conflict.
So this is beautiful, Larissa. Thank you so much. So you have talked about how do you put this in practice with very young children, and that a lot of people are curious about that. Like, so how do I listen actively, reflectively to my very young child who doesn't have many words? How do I use iMessages with my very young child? How do you do, you have different needs, say you have different needs from me, and what are your needs? What are my needs with a child that is so young? It's a big question, right?
It is, and so because I have been noting down things from when they're really young, I think, look, when you take a baby home from hospital, we're told, well, read to them. As soon as you take them home, start reading to them. And yet they can't focus. They can't focus more than like your face away. They don't know what you're reading. And I think that what P.E.T is doing is it's giving us language, and at the same time it's giving our children language. If we don't talk to them, if we don't use the language, they can't learn it. We're not modelling it, they can't learn it. And I have, and And I think often, particularly active listening with little guys, like before when they're pre-verbal, we sort of automatically empathise with them and we active listen. And so when they're crying, we'll be saying, oh, you're really sad, you're really uncomfortable, that looks awful, that your bottom looks so sore. And then we might do some problem solving with them, like saying, let's make that better by, let's get you out of that nappy and put you into a clean one. So we're sort of problem solving and solving their, we talk about that and that's automatic. As they become verbal, I don't know why, but I reckon it seems like we sort of stop doing that. So my experience has been that, and this has been the experience of many of the parents that have got young children and they start implementing these skills, is that once you start doing this with young children, we're teaching them at the same time and they can pick up the skills. So for example, my daughter was 20 months old and she was watching a Pingu. Do you know Pingu? Anyway, this is a video, a children's video. And I was in the other room and all of a sudden she started to cry. And I came in and I assumed that she was sad. So I said, oh, you're sad. Pingu made you really sad. And she looked at me and she said, no, not sad, scared. So she was able to differentiate between sad and scared at 20 months. And I thought this was just an example, and it's only because I've been using these feeling words. And the I messages, which is like when I say how I feel, what that's doing is it's asking our children to consider their behaviour and how that is on someone else. And so often, you know, people say, oh, children can't do that till they're 7. And if we don't give them the chance, of course not. But if we start giving them the chance from a young age to show us that they can empathise and consider. And so I can remember, say, again, I think this is my daughter at a younger age, maybe 2, sort of saying, because she wanted to take the inside car, you know, the plastic car, she wanted to take that outside. And so you have to be a bit more demonstrative and use simpler language or their language, but still using words like frustrated and angry, because how else are they going to know it if we don't use it, if we don't teach it to them? So it was something, she wanted to take the inside car outside. So I sort of say, oh, I'm worried that if you take that inside car outside, that all the wheels are going to get dirt on them. So I point to the dirt on the wheels, pretend dirt. And then I said, and then when it comes inside, I'm going to have to vacuum. All the dirt's going to go on the carpet and I'm going to have to vacuum, and I don't want to have to vacuum. And she just looks at me and she says, oh, dirty, and then brings the car back inside.
That's so beautiful. I mean, because that's the thing. People don't think like a 2-year-old can empathize with another because they are by nature so self-centered. I mean, that's how they should be, but that's so beautiful. You're showing right there in that story how she can see that. She can understand that.
And giving them the chance. Can I give you a third story?
Yeah, yes, please. I love these stories. They're wonderful.
So this one's in, so I've done a series of 3 or 4 articles, I think, on my website in terms of, you know, when the child owns a problem, when I'm unhappy, or when the parent's unhappy. And then this one is when both of us are unhappy. And this was a situation where I was at a friend's place and my daughter was 25 months old and she was playing with a friend who was also 25 months old. And they were just playing, and the mum and I were sitting watching, and then let's say Holly, that's the friend, goes and sits on a little box just big enough for her bottom, and she starts to read a book. And my daughter, who I'll say is Phoebe, just continues to play. Then Holly gets up from her box and walks away. So my daughter immediately sits on the box and grabs Holly's book.
Of course.
Of course. And then Holly comes back and she starts pointing, and her little mouth is downturned, and she says, "Mine, mine." And my daughter looks at her defiantly and says, "Mine." And Holly says, "But mine, mine." And my daughter goes, "Mine." Meanwhile, Holly's mum and I are sort of looking, and I'm saying, and I'm acutely conscious that Holly's mum knows that I do this strange parenting practice, and worse than that, I teach it. So anyway, my daughter doesn't change. So I stand up very reluctantly and go over there and try to mediate, because in P.E.T. we sort of talk about mediating rather than saying, right, you do, rather than being judge and jury in terms of children that are having a conflict. We look at mediating. So I say to my daughter, I can see you really like reading that book. I'm worried. Look, Holly's really sad. She's really sad because that's her box and you're reading her book. And my daughter just shakes her head and says, "Mine." "Oh, you're really liking reading Holly's book and sitting on her box." And my daughter nods her head. And then I repeat it, and nothing changes. Mm-hmm. And at this stage, I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do? Because they're only 25 months old. There's no way they can go into problem solving. But I have nothing else in my that I can think of. I could have gone into modifying the environment, giving her something else to do perhaps. But I didn't do that. And at that point, I just thought, right, I've only got one other tool, and that's problem solving. I've got nothing to lose. So I said to my daughter, "Do you have any ideas how both you and Holly can be happy?" And she brightens up, sits up straight, and she points to like about an inch beside her on the box, and she said, "Yes, Holly next. Holly next." "Oh, so you'd like Holly to sit next to you on the box so you can both be on the box and read the book?" "Yes." And I looked at Holly and I said, "Would you be happy with that?" And she said, "Yes." So they both busily tried to get one cheek each on the box, and then they were off. And I think, anyway, so for me, that's an example of, and what I found all the time is that the PET skills help me see how much I underestimated my children. Mm-hmm. So if we don't give them the opportunity, we'll never see. So,
that's so beautiful. Like if you had jumped in and said, "I have to solve this problem. I have to control everything. I have to kind of be in, control of this situation." You had never given them the chance, and they never would have, you would have never thought both of these children will squeeze on this tiny little box. I mean, I love that. I love those examples of how kids come up with ways to meet everybody's needs and solve their problems, because it's never like what we think it's going to be.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Can I give you another one?
Sure. Yeah. I love these examples because it takes it out of just oh, maybe that'll work for you, or maybe that sounds all well and good, but these are the things people think. This is, that sounds all well and good, but this is real life, and I have to use threatening. I have to use punishment. And, a lot, what you're demonstrating here is that what you're first doing is taking a moment to pause and kind of step back into yourself and not be so reactive. And then just taking a moment and what you're really talking about is acting out of trust rather than fear. Like you're giving them a chance and you're giving them this trust, but you're please do give me another story, because you're putting it into real world context, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's about trusting your children, and particularly with iMessages, people say, well, they're not going to change. Why would they do that? Why, they don't even care what I feel. And for me, it's about trusting your children to care, because what's in it for them to have you angry with them all the time? What's in it for them to have you ostracized from them? That their whole future and their whole lives is invested in their relationship with you.
They do care. And I just want to interject here, because people don't trust that, and it takes time, especially if a child has kind of been raised conventionally, for them to trust you again. But it's amazing also then, once you get into the pattern and the habit of that, and it really can positively snowball in a really beautiful way. And I just want to say that from my own life, it really gets easier and easier as time goes on. Okay, so share your story.
Got a zillion of them, but this one's more just about the power of modeling, and then I can give you another one that's actually in the P.E.T book if you want. But so this one's just the power of modeling, and it's just about my son, he was about 4. So we go to the kids go to preschool here when they're about 4, and then they go to school, kindergarten at age 5. So anyway, he was at preschool, and they had a cubby house up the back of the school. And at the end of the year, the preschool teacher came to me, and she said that she and her assistant had noticed that, like, normally every year they spend a lot of time in the cubby house sorting out squabbles between kids, because, they're playing with dolls or whatever they're playing with in the cubby house. And they noticed at the end of the year, they independently noticed that they hadn't spent as much time sorting out the difficulties. And they'd realised that my son he'd be playing in the cubby house, and the kids would start to argue, and he'd say, oh, so you're unhappy about this. So what ideas could you come up with where you could both be happy? And so he was mediating his friends' arguments.
Wow. That's so cool. Oh my gosh.
So it interests me because that he was a single child too. So he's just taken that from, I suppose he's just learned that from our interactions.
And it's interesting because when you see a lot of kids with interact with each other, what we see as bad behavior is often them modeling or reflecting the behavior that's around them, which is ordering and commands. Don't do that. Do this. Blah, 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 and oftentimes we don't see it as a reflection of what's, in our lives. So that's really cool. Oh my gosh, Larissa, it's amazing. I love you have now sort of years of experience looking at this and seeing this and seeing this whole other way and experiencing it, in your own life very intimately and very personally. And I'm wondering now, kind of going back to your son being older, your daughter being a teenager, with that perspective of time and age, how do you think, it has affected your life kind of in the bigger picture, and how has it shifted things for you in the bigger picture?
In terms of my relationship with my children, or in terms of my children, like for me, it was whole life changing. So I became an instructor, and but also my whole work process and writing sort of revolved around this. In terms of my children, I think we have a really good relationship, and honest and caring at the same time. And I'm not going to shy away from saying friendship. And respectful, and we will apologise if we need to. And interesting, and I know you're talking about children, but you asked about life in general.
Yeah.
So what I've also really found useful is I'm in the sandwich generation, so I've also got older parents, and I found these skills have been incredibly useful in terms of being a carer. And so my mother died, I don't know, for a few months ago, but prior to that she had dementia. And really the skills were incredibly helpful for trying to help my mum through her confusion, particularly the listening. So I can remember ringing up one time and her carer was beside himself because she'd been awake since 1 o'clock, confused, wandering around the house, really upset. And even on the phone. So first of all, I listened to her carer to sort of say, well, how hard it was for him and how frustrated it was for him. And then he put my mum on. And I just said to her, wow, Mum, sounds like you're really frustrated. There's something just on the edge of your mind and you just can't grab it and you just don't know what to do. And, just even through the phone, I could hear her say, yes, I'm so anxious. I just don't know. And then she started to, she could put sentences together at that time. But, the relief to be heard, it was quite astonishing. And what was also interesting was that my daughter, she was younger then, she was actually listening to the conversation and she said to me something like, oh, wow, Mum, that I can see how that active listening worked really well with Grandma. So it's the modelling, but it's putting these skills into practice across the board. And that's how I found it really useful. And I again go back to saying I'm really not perfect, and sometimes I have pride, and I have to wait for a little bit before I'm maybe not with my children, but perhaps with my partner. But I hope that in general those relationship skills have helped me across the board in all my relationships.
That's so cool. That's so cool. So you can find Larissa's blog at parentskills.com.au because she's in Australia, obviously. And Larissa, I'd love to just end with, if you have any kind of ask for the listener or the audience, like if you have any kind of like one step that they could take as they kind of take what you have offered and kind of incorporate this learning into their life, like is there one step or one thing they could take into their lives? What would you say that might be?
I'd say don't take your children's behaviour personally. Take it seriously.
Yes. That is so, so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast, Larissa. I really appreciate your time. And now I can send you off to bed way up late.
The birds will be singing soon. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to your listeners.
Thank you so much for listening to the Mindful Mama podcast. I love Larissa's stories. Aren't they amazing? I'm really going to take away that advice on mediating conflict with toddlers and that whole idea that children don't misbehave. It's really important. Let's stop taking this so personally, people, right? Like that's a big thing. If you have any questions, you can email me at hunter@hunterclarkfields.com. You can find this podcast and others over at mindfulmamapodcast.com. And we would so appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating. That really helps the podcast get known and share the love with the world, helps people find it on the iTunes algorithm. which is really great. So please do go ahead and find that. And just a quick reminder, I am going to be enrolling my group coaching programs coming soon. This may be a busy time of year with the holidays and things, but is really a powerful time of year to get started, to create that inner groundedness and inner peace and those things that, once they are inside, then we can give them outside. We learn parenting and communication skills and really transform in patterns in a big way. So I invite you to check that out over at mindfulmamamentor.com under work with me. So you can find the schedule there. It's a 6-month program. We go through to May. And you even receive a spot in the full mindful parenting course when it comes around in March. It's an incredible deal, and we get to work intimately together, and I really love it, and it's very powerful. So do check that out. We have applications, so check that out soon if you are listening in real time. And then finally, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your presence. I appreciate you watering the seeds and helping to be part of this Mindful Mama tribe to transform things for the next generation. It's amazing. So I'm just thrilled that you are here and that we get to connect in this way. Thank you so much. And I wish you a beautiful week. Namaste. Are you a mom who wants to feel less stressed and enjoy motherhood more? Do you want to be calmer with your kids and be more present for all of your life? I'm a mom who has gone from really being stressed and yelling when my kids were young to having a more grounded, more at ease relationship with life and having more enjoyable cooperative relationships with my kids. And I've shown hundreds and thousands of women around the world how to do this. And I want to show you how to do it too. So if you are currently feeling stuck or stagnant, this is definitely for you. I've created a free downloadable Audible training, Mindfulness for Moms, the Superpower You Need. And it will show you how to respond rather than react, how to let go of stress and feel more grounded in seconds, how to have a smoother day today and become more present for your kids for a lifetime. To get on this audio training absolutely free, simply visit the website www.mindfulmomguide.com.